Why did the lieutenant's clipboard hit the floor with such a sharp metallic clang? The sound tore through the stillness of the armory, echoing against concrete and steel, breaking the rhythm of cloth against glass. Tessa Ward froze for just half a second, her latex-gloved hands hovering over the rifle's scope she had been polishing. She blinked, confused, the motion of her dust cloth interrupted. It wasn't normal for a SEAL to lose composure. They were carved from stone, trained to control every gesture, every breath. But something about her, something he had just seen, had rattled him. She didn't know it yet, but her life of invisibility had just cracked. Tessa lowered her eyes again, resuming her careful circles over the glass. The scope gleamed under fluorescent light, clearer now with every pass. She told herself not to overthink. She'd been through mornings like this countless times before: polish, inspect, prepare, move on. Yet the silence behind her was no longer the easy silence of professionals at work. It was a silence weighted with recognition, suspicion, and something more dangerous. The SEAL's clipboard lay abandoned on the floor. His eyes hadn't left her. And what he had glimpsed wasn't the rifle. It wasn't her hands. It was the faint edge of her dog tag, tilted just enough beneath her collar to catch the light. 2940 M. Engraved into steel so faintly it was almost invisible, unless you knew what you were looking for, unless you knew the legend behind those numbers. Tessa didn't notice. She kept her head bent, auburn hair pulled tight into regulation neatness, coveralls plain, unremarkable. That was how she had survived 3 years, by being unremarkable, by blending into the beige background of Naval Base Coronado, lost in the endless shuffle of maintenance and routine. She wasn't a pilot, not anymore. She wasn't a sniper, at least not officially. She was just another worker in coveralls, tasked with cleaning the weapons others would wield. That's all anyone saw. Or so she thought. The day had begun like every other. At 500 hours, she'd swiped her card, boots ringing against polished concrete, the familiar tang of gun oil and solvent seeping into her senses like second-hand caffeine. Her ritual had always been the same. Tie hair back, gloves on, cloth folded, scopes polished in patient, circular movements. There was comfort in repetition. Comfort in knowing she could vanish inside a routine so ordinary no one would ever question it. But now the routine was cracking. She felt it. The SEAL team had arrived just after 8:30, boots pounding down the main corridor with that unmistakable cadence. Confident, predatory. They weren't like the others stationed here. Special operations didn't walk into a room, they filled it, shifted the very air. Tessa had seen their type before, long ago. Men who carried both the calm of discipline and the storm of combat in their eyes. They moved with purpose, scanning everything, weighing it, knowing that details were what kept them alive. She hadn't flinched when they entered. She never did. Instead, she'd done what she always did, focused harder on the weapon before her, making sure every lens, every edge of steel gleamed. Her world was measured in scratches and specks of dust, in the invisible details others missed. That was her cover. That was her armor. But now Lieutenant Davidson, steel-gray eyes, lined face of a man who had seen too much combat, was staring at her like she was a ghost. She risked a glance. He wasn't looking at the rifle anymore. He wasn't looking at her hands or the neat rows of rifles laid out for inspection. He was staring at her collar. No, not the collar, the tag. Her dog tag. The number. He knew it. Tessa's pulse skipped, though her face remained neutral. She was trained for that. Years of military discipline drilled into her until even fear had a mask. She looked up, tilted her head slightly, and forced her voice calm. "Is everything all right, sir?" The lieutenant blinked, as if shaking himself back into the present. His fingers, stiff, reached down for the clipboard. He muttered something about losing his grip, but his voice carried a tremor, just enough for his team to notice, just enough for her to notice. She kept her face neutral, eyes lowered again to the rifle, but inside her chest old instincts flared. Not just paranoia, survival. She had lived this before. The moment when the mask slips, when someone looks too closely, when cover threatens to dissolve into smoke. She remembered another morning years ago far from these walls, a mountainside in Afghanistan, a Marine unit caught in an ambush. She had been their ghost in the rocks, scope trained on a commander who thought he was untouchable. She had steadied her breath, squeezed the trigger, and sent a round across 2,940 meters of thin air and broken earth, the longest shot of her life, the shot that had turned her into a legend inside the sniper community. A legend the military had later declared dead. Dead. That was the key. That was how she survived. Teresa Blackwood, Ghost 6, had died 3 years ago, her name carved into stone, her body listed as never recovered, her record sealed, her existence erased. Only Tessa Ward remained. And now Davidson's eyes told her he didn't believe in Tessa Ward. The SEAL team shifted subtly, their easy professionalism tightening into something more focused. One of them, Collins, shot a questioning glance at Davidson. Years of partnership had taught him to read every flicker of expression in his leader's face, and Davidson's face had changed. He'd seen something. He knew something. And Tessa felt the air grow heavy. She bent lower over the scope, cloth moving in neat circles again, but her mind had already slipped into old patterns, assessing exits, calculating distances, memorizing guard rotations. She knew this base better than most who lived on it. She had studied it without meaning to. The habit of survival had never left her. If they pressed her too hard, if they pulled her into questioning, she'd need contingencies, a plan. But another part of her, deep down, wasn't afraid. It was restless. 3 years of wiping down rifles, of watching others wield weapons she could handle better than anyone alive. 3 years of keeping silent when she saw younger marksmen fumble with basics she had mastered before most of them had even deployed. 3 years of wearing a mask so tight it suffocated her. And now one man, with a single glance, had broken through. The cloth stilled in her hand. She looked up again just briefly. Davidson was watching her, still. His eyes narrowed, mind racing. He knew the number, she knew he knew. And in that quiet moment, she understood something that made her stomach turn. Her cover was gone. Not today, not completely. Not in a way she couldn't still patch together, deny, bury beneath layers of plausible lies. But the process had begun. He had seen her. And once someone sees you, the real you, nothing is ever the same. She returned her focus to the scope, finished her cleaning with slow, methodical care, and set the rifle aside. Her motions were precise, calm, professional. To anyone else in the room, she was just another worker completing another inspection. But inside, her thoughts spun, colliding, breaking apart. She thought of Corporal Martinez, her spotter, whose life had ended in those Afghan mountains. A kid from Texas who had never met his daughter. She thought of the blood, the smoke, the crawl back to friendly lines that should have killed her too. She thought of the intelligence officers who had convinced her it was better for her country, better for the mission, that she remained dead. That Ghost 6 disappear forever. And she thought of the number etched into steel, hanging from her neck, a secret too heavy to bury. When Davidson finally spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost careful. "Ma'am, continue with your work." But it wasn't permission, it was surveillance. And Tessa Ward realized the day she had dreaded for 3 years had finally come. Someone had recognized the ghost. But what would he do with that knowledge? She didn't know, not yet. All she knew was that her world of safety, repetition, and quiet anonymity was about to collapse, because of a single number, engraved on steel, shining faintly in the light. 2,940. Why was the lieutenant still watching her? Minutes had passed, rifles inspected, weapons handled, but his eyes always drifted back. He tried to look busy, clipboard in hand again, lips pressed into thought. Yet the silence between them hummed, louder than words. Tessa felt it in her bones. Recognition wasn't something you could undo. Once seen, you stayed seen. She moved on to the next weapon on her list, a heavy system that required care and precision. The kind of rifle she knew in her sleep. Her hands worked on instinct, checking scope, bolt, barrel alignment. But she also felt every glance from the SEAL team pressing against her back. Davidson was trying to act natural, but his two men weren't fools. Collins, his spotter, was watching him more than the weapons, and Hayes, the younger one, restless, sharp-eyed, had started paying attention too. They didn't know what had disturbed their leader, but they knew something had. Tessa adjusted her grip on the cloth, wiped the next lens clean, and lowered her head to mask the flicker of unease in her eyes. Inside, though, she was counting options. Could she excuse herself early? No. That would draw attention. Could she conceal the tag more carefully? Too late. The image was already locked in Davidson's memory. Her chest tightened. For 3 years she'd lived carefully, each day a test of restraint. No slips, no sudden movements, no hints of who she had been. She let Ghost 6 remain buried in those Afghan mountains. And yet, now, the way Davidson's jaw tightened when she moved, the way his gray eyes scanned her posture, her familiarity with the weapons, the unconscious precision in her fingers, it all betrayed the question running through his mind. Is she the ghost? Tessa set the rifle down, exhaled slowly, and reached for the next one. But Davidson finally broke the silence. Collins, his voice was low, deliberate, run a background check on her, quietly. Collins frowned. On maintenance staff, sir. Just do it, Davidson said, never taking his eyes off Tessa. Her hand froze midway to the cloth. She didn't look up, didn't let her expression shift, but her ears burned. He was digging. He would find the trail, faint though it was. Records polished and forged, but not perfect. Small cracks existed, cracks men like Collins were trained to spot. Her pulse thudded once, heavy. Then she forced herself to move, cloth in hand again, steady circles on steel. She had prepared for this possibility. She had always known it might come, but knowing it didn't make the moment easier. Davidson studied her longer. He caught the way her fingers avoided smudging the rifle's balance points, the unconscious adjustments she made to the scope as though she had lived behind one. Maintenance didn't teach that. You learned that through sweat, hours on the range, in the field, on missions where mistakes weren't allowed. Ghost 6. He knew the name. Everyone in the community knew it. A legend. A sniper who had made a shot so long it was whispered like a myth. But legends had graves. Her grave had been carved 3 years ago. Her name etched on a wall. She was gone. And yet, Davidson's jaw clenched. He needed proof. A detail too sharp to ignore. He couldn't take suspicions back to command, not without something concrete. But the number, that number wasn't random. He waited until Collins and Hayes were distracted, cataloging another system. Then he moved closer, quiet steps across the polished floor. "Ma'am," he said, tone casual but layered, "could I have a word?" Tessa looked up, cloth still in her hand. Her eyes flickered, neutral, professional, but she knew. "Yes, sir. Privately." Her stomach sank, though her face remained calm. Refusing wasn't an option. Agreeing meant risk. Either way, the walls around her life were closing. She placed the rifle gently back into its rack, removed her gloves, and followed him a few paces down the armory, away from the others. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. The scent of solvent and oil clung to the air. Davidson positioned himself so his body language was non-threatening, but his eyes were sharp, unblinking. "I'm going to ask you something directly," he said, voice quiet enough to vanish into the hum. "And I want you to answer honestly." Tessa's heart beat hard. She steadied her breathing. "Have you ever made a shot at 2,940 meters?" The word struck like a round to the chest. She had braced for it, but hearing it aloud in this sterile room under fluorescent light made it real. The mask she had worn for years had cracked open. Her eyes didn't widen, she didn't flinch. She had been trained too well for that, but a pause, a single heartbeat betrayed her. She considered denial. Easiest, cleanest. A simple no, but Davidson wasn't guessing. He was certain enough to risk asking. If she lied, he would know. So she shifted, not into admission, not into confession, but into careful maneuver. Her voice was steady, low. "Why would you ask me that question, sir?" Davidson's eyes didn't leave hers. Because only one person in U.S. records ever did, and according to every report, she died 3 years ago, in Afghanistan. The silence between them grew heavy. Tessa's mind spun. She searched his face, looking for intent, for whether he was a threat, a rescuer, or something in between. His expression was calm, measured, but beneath it she saw it, the soldier's hunger for truth, the kind that never stopped once it started. If she admitted, the mask shattered. If she denied, the suspicion grew. Finally she spoke, words deliberate. "If such a person existed," she said softly, "and if she were dead, maybe there were reasons she wanted it that way." Davidson exhaled slowly. Not denial, not confirmation, but enough to know. "There might be," he admitted. His voice carried something new now. Not accusation, not threat, but a proposition. "There might also be situations where her skills could save lives, even if she prefers to stay dead." Her eyes narrowed, studying him. The suggestion caught her off guard. For years she had assumed discovery meant exposure. Exposure meant court-martial, prison, or worse. Yet here was a SEAL lieutenant hinting at something different. Possibility. "What kind of situations?" she asked carefully. "The kind," Davidson said, "where American lives are on the line, where conventional solutions aren't enough, where someone like you makes the difference." The words hit something deep inside her chest. A part of her she had smothered with routines, with cloth and solvent, with ordinary mornings. That part stirred now, restless, hungry. She remembered the weight of the rifle against her shoulder, the calm that came before the shot, the knowledge that what she did mattered, that lives depended on her. And she remembered the silence since then. 3 years of erasure, 3 years of living like a ghost. She wanted to ask more, wanted to demand guarantees, to know if this was bait, a trap. But Collins glanced over from across the room, watching them, suspicion clear in his eyes. Hayes looked up too. They were noticing. The private bubble of their conversation was about to break. Tessa's voice dropped to a whisper. If someone like that ever agreed, she'd need guarantees. Absolute anonymity, no records, no traces. Davidson nodded once, understood. Her pulse hammered. The old world was opening its hand to her again. Dangerous, yes, but real. And Tessa Ward realized that, for the first time in 3 years, she was considering stepping back into it. Why did she agree to meet him after duty hours? All day the question circled her mind like a predator. Tessa Ward had been careful for 3 years, careful enough to bury Ghost 6 so deep she almost believed the grave herself. And now, in a single moment, she had cracked that burial wide open. She told herself it was curiosity, or necessity, that refusing Davidson outright would only make him dig harder, but deep down she knew the truth. She wanted to pick up the rifle again. When her shift ended, she drove out through the base gates like always, her modest Camry blending into traffic. Hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the road, but her heart carried the weight of a decision that might rewrite everything. The range Davidson had named was 30 minutes inland, tucked in the folds of rural scrubland where the city lights fell away. By the time she pulled into the gravel lot, her headlights cut across empty pickup trucks and a squat building painted in muted grays. Discreet, forgotten, the kind of place men in their world used when they didn't want questions. He was already waiting. Civilian clothes, but his posture gave him away instantly, straight-backed, shoulders loose but alert, eyes sweeping the lot as if he couldn't stop calculating threats. Beside him, a long rifle case leaned against the hood of his vehicle. "You came," Davidson said. "I wasn't sure until I pulled in," she admitted. Inside, the range smelled of cordite and sawdust. The owner, a grizzled man with veteran's eyes, greeted them without names, only a nod. Discretion was the unspoken law here. He unlocked a long lane, extended past the standard 600, 800, 1,000 yards, out to 1,200. Not 2940, no, but far enough to separate real shooters from pretenders. Davidson set the rifle case on the bench, opening it with quiet ceremony. The weapon inside gleamed, an M2010, customized, balanced, built for precision. Match-grade rounds waited in their boxes, gleaming brass under fluorescent light. Tessa approached slowly, her breath tight in her chest. She hadn't touched one like this in years. Her fingers hovered over the stock before she finally laid them down. The wood was cool, familiar. The bolt smooth, unscarred. The scope crystal clear. "How long?" Davidson asked softly. 3 years, 2 months. 16 days, she answered without hesitation. His brows lifted slightly. She hadn't rounded the number, hadn't guessed. She counted every day. She ran her fingers across the weapon, making small adjustments. Nothing dramatic. A tilt here, a balance there. Her hands moved without thought, the way a pianist falls into keys after years of silence. She worked the bolt, tested the trigger, adjusted the cheek rest, then lay prone, slipping into the position like she had never left it. Davidson set his spotting scope beside her. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She breathed in, out. The rhythm returned, slow and steady, old instincts snapping back into place like a watch winding into time. First shot, 800 meters. She studied the target, gauged wind with the slight ripple of grass. Elevation, angle, pressure. Small details, all calculated in silence. Then she squeezed. The crack split the air. The round flew. And the target, so distant it seemed like a ghost itself, jolted with a neat hole inside the ring. Davidson didn't flinch, didn't praise, just watched. Second shot, third, fourth. By the fifth, the group was so tight the paper looked like it had been burned by a single spark. Tessa lifted her head slightly, looked at him, satisfied. He didn't blink, longer. She nodded once. They moved to the farthest distance, 1,200 meters. She adjusted again, mental math flicking through wind speed, drop, drag, no charts. No apps, just her head, just her training. She exhaled, let the world go quiet, squeezed. The target flinched, dead center. Then another and another. 5 rounds, all clustered within a hand's breadth at 1,200 meters. She rolled onto her side, setting the rifle down carefully. Now. Davidson lowered his spotting scope. For the first time since that morning, he let a flicker of something cross his face. Respect. "Now," he said softly, "I'm convinced." The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. She wiped her palms against her jeans, realizing they were damp. 3 years without firing, and her body still remembered every breath, every adjustment. But this wasn't about memory. It was about choice. "What happens next?" she asked. "That depends," Davidson said, folding the rifle case shut, "on whether you want to stay invisible or whether you want to matter again." Her eyes narrowed. "And if I say no?" "Then I walk away," he said simply. "I saw nothing. You go back to cleaning rifles. Ghost 6 stays buried." The words cut. Cleaning rifles. Staying buried. Safety, yes, but suffocating. She pictured herself again in that armory, cloth moving in circles, pretending her life was nothing more than oil and steel. Could she go back to that now, after feeling this again? "And if I say yes?" Davidson held her gaze. "Then there's a mission, one you're built for, time-sensitive, lives on the line, and the kind of shot no one else can make." The air between them shifted. She hadn't realized how much she missed that pull, the call of necessity. The knowledge that what she could do wasn't just rare, it was irreplaceable. But then the old warning returned. Promises had buried her before. Intelligence officers had told her it was for the greater good, that her death would protect others. And she had believed them. only to find herself stripped of everything she was. Her throat tightened. She couldn't let that happen again. "I would need guarantees," she said quietly. "No records, no exposure. If I walk away, I walk away. No questions, no consequences." Davidson nodded slowly. "Agreed. But first, I need to know you can still do what the stories say you can." She glanced at the rifle case he was closing. "You just saw it." He shook his head. "I saw proof you can shoot. I didn't see proof you can save lives when it counts. There's a difference." His words hung in the air, sharp, deliberate. She said nothing, but inside she felt it, the stir of the ghost inside her, restless, waiting. Davidson packed the rifle away, nodded once to the range owner, then turned back to her. "Think about it. You don't have long. The mission window's closing. I'll need your answer tomorrow." He walked away without looking back, leaving her standing under the cold, fluorescent lights, hands trembling slightly, though she didn't let herself notice. Outside, the night air wrapped around her like ice. She climbed into her Camry, sat in the driver's seat, and didn't start the engine right away. Her hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. 3 years of silence, 3 years of erasure, and now the choice stood in front of her again. Stay buried or come back. She closed her eyes. The number etched into her dog tag burned against her chest. 2940. A reminder, a ghost, a weight. And she knew, even before she admitted it to herself, that she had already made the choice. Why was Davidson calling her ghost now? She hadn't heard that name in 3 years, not spoken aloud, not even whispered in memory. But when his voice came through the secure line that night, low and steady, he didn't say Tessa. He didn't say Ward. He said, "Ghost 6, I need you." The words froze her where she stood, alone in her small apartment, rifle oil still faint on her hands. She stared at the burner phone on the counter, the glow of the screen painting her face pale in the dark kitchen. Ghost 6. She thought that name had been buried with Martinez in the Afghan dust. She thought it had died the day intelligence officers told her she'd never wear it again. Yet Davidson spoke it like a lifeline. She didn't answer right away. She paced, muscles tight, heart loud in her ears. That name carried weight. It carried blood. It carried every ounce of skill and silence she had forged into her bones. And it carried a promise that if Ghost 6 came back, people would live or die. "What mission?" she asked finally. Davidson didn't waste words. "American hostage, Somalia, politically sensitive, conventional rescue will get her killed. We need precision fire support, extended range. You're the only one who can do it." Her hand tightened around the phone. "Somalia, not training, not tests, a real op, immediate." She closed her eyes, seeing Martinez's face again. The way he'd grinned in the dust, the way he'd died too young, the way she'd sworn she was done. "You have 72 hours, Davidson added. "Maybe less. I need your answer by dawn." The line went quiet. She didn't sleep that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, the number 2940 echoing in her head like a bell. The distance that defined her, the ghost she could never bury. By morning, her choice was made. "This is Ghost 6, she said into the phone. "I'm in." The response came sharp, immediate. "Copy that, welcome back." Yeah. The briefing facility wasn't on the maps. Just a warehouse inland, its windows blacked out, its parking lot empty. But inside, the air buzzed with purpose. Banks of screens lit the walls, satellite feeds flickered in real time, and men and women in uniforms of every cut moved like a single machine. When Tessa walked in, all conversation dipped for a heartbeat. She wasn't in coveralls now. Davidson had told her to come as she was, but as she was didn't exist anymore. So she wore jeans, a plain shirt, and silence. Davidson gestured her forward. "This is our precision fire specialist," he said to the room. "No name, no explanation, just that." The others studied her. Delta operators, Air Force Special Ops, shadowed intelligence officers. They didn't ask questions. Not yet. But she saw their eyes measuring her, weighing her, wondering what invisible credentials had earned her a seat at this table. The satellite feed shifted to Mogadishu, a cluster of low buildings, walled compounds, dirt roads like scars. Davidson's voice cut through the silence. Target is Jennifer Richardson, State Department, taken during negotiations last week, being held here. He pointed at a building circled in red. 15 guards confirmed, probably more, armed, trained, tied to Al-Shabaab. The image zoomed. Tessa leaned forward. Elevated ground, walls reinforced, patrol routes looping the compound. Fields of fire overlapping. Any frontal assault would be a bloodbath. Direct entry means Richardson dies, Davidson said. We need every guard neutralized within 60 seconds. Breach follows immediately. The operators around the table nodded grimly. They'd done impossible before, but this was razor-thin timing. Then Davidson's eyes slid toward Tessa. Overwatch will handle precision fire. Longest shot 2,100 meters, 9 targets, 1 minute. Her jaw tightened. 9 men, 60 seconds, at distances that punished the smallest error. It was doable, barely, but one mistake meant chaos. Can you do it? Davidson asked. She looked at the satellite feed again. She calculated angles, distances, timing. She pictured the rifle in her hands, the breath, the trigger, the silence after. Yes, she said finally, but not if anyone rushes me. Every shot has to be perfect, and the sequence matters. You want them down, you give me the order, exactly. No improvisation. Davidson nodded, done. The room shifted slightly. Respect, still questions, yes, but respect. The rest of the briefing blurred into details. Exfil routes, comms, emergency med evac, aircraft on standby, layers of redundancy that gave the illusion of safety, though everyone knew there was none. When it ended, Davidson handed her a case. Inside, an M2010 system unlike any she'd ever handled before. Customized stock, advanced thermal optics, match-grade ammunition, zeroed and tuned for the exact conditions they expected. She ran her fingers over it slowly, reverently. She had thought she'd never touch one again, yet here it was, waiting for her. You'll have 12 hours on the ground before breach, Davidson told her. Enough to set up, chart ranges, prepare contingencies. Her eyes narrowed. And if something goes wrong? Then you disappear, Davidson said. Back into Tessa Ward, no records, no proof. Ghost stays a ghost. The words were meant to reassure, but they rang hollow. She knew the truth. Once she took that shot, whoever watched would never forget. Ghost 6 would be alive again, whether the records admitted it or not. Yeah. Later, in a quiet corner of the facility, she sat with the rifle across her lap. She checked the balance, the trigger, the optics. Every part felt both new and familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend in a new uniform. But as her fingers moved, her chest grew heavy. She thought of the life she'd built these past 3 years. The quiet mornings, the safety of anonymity, the small freedoms of being no one at all. She could walk away, right now. Leave the rifle, disappear into her car and drive back to base. Pretend none of this ever happened. But then she thought of Jennifer Richardson, a woman locked in a concrete room halfway across the world, surrounded by men with guns, counting the hours of her life. And Tessa knew she couldn't walk away. Safety wasn't the same as living. She set the rifle back into its case, locking it shut. Her reflection caught in the polished steel of the optic. She didn't see Tessa Ward anymore. She saw the ghost. Yeah. At 300 hours, the team boarded a modified aircraft, a C-130, bristling with sensors and firepower. Engines roared against the night. She strapped in silently, rifle case secured beside her, while men around her checked weapons and gear. No one spoke to her. No one asked her name, but she felt their eyes, the quiet curiosity, the unspoken question. Who is she? She closed her eyes, steadied her breath, and let the question hang unanswered. By dawn, she would have answered it for them all. Why did the ground feel like an accusation beneath her boots? The AC-130's engines had fallen away behind them, and the night held its breath as they walked. Every step was measured, rehearsed, the way thieves move through sleeping houses. But for Tessa, each footfall carried the memory of other nights, of sand in her teeth, of someone's face in the crosshairs, of the taste of fear that had once become routine. It came back like muscle memory, not voluntary but inevitable. They moved in darkness, radios whispering, boots barely scuffing the dirt. The insertion point was 6 kilometers from the compound, a small clearing under the gaunt silhouette of a lone acacia tree. Even now, the world smelled of dust and diesel and the cold metal of the rifle case beside her. The assault team split like practice shade, Delta elements taking point, small teams following, Davidson leading the Overwatch liaison. She kept her head down, hood up, breath steady, watching the patterns of movement that would carry them toward an unknown danger. A heat shimmer suggested the distant lights of Mogadishu, but the compound they approached was a pocket of geometry in the wild. Walls, guard towers, the flat roofs of buildings that cast long shadows. Satellite imagery had its limits. Reality offered wind and grit and the unpredictable things maps could not capture. An extra patrol, a watchman with a cigarette, a dog that barked at the wrong moment. Those were the things that ended plans. They walked for 3 hours. Darkness rose and fell like a tide, and the group moved like a single shadow across the landscape. Tessa's legs burned, but fatigue had become a familiar itch she could ignore. She breathed in, counted her steps, secured her sling. Every detail was minor unless it was. Every minor thing could become the hinge on which the mission turned. When they reached a stony rise that gave them a line of sight toward the compound, Davidson pointed and whispered, "There. That ridge, you'll have a clearing and a downward angle. Good concealment below you. 2 exfil options, one north, one south. Hello rally at grid point echo. You're on comm 3. She nodded, taking in the coordinates, the escape vectors. He handed her a small packet, environmental brief, temperature profiles, wind reads, ballistic data specific to the match-grade rounds. The basic math of long-range engagement laid out in neat columns. She scanned it and stored the numbers, committing angles to memory like prayers. Her field position was precise but vulnerable, an exposed ledge sloping rocks that offered good sightlines but limited hiding places. It would have to be enough. They moved her and the small Overwatch team, the 2 ground-born techs who would run comms and data, and a medic with a cold, efficient stoicism, away from the main force and into the shadow of the ridge. They worked silently, kits unfolding into practiced choreography. Tripods lined up, monopods settled. The M2010s came out, weight familiar and foreign all at once. Setting up the rifle was a ritual. She measured aperture, balanced the bipod, confirmed 0, and then took a long breath. The elevation adjustments for a 200-200-meter engagement weren't forgiving. A miscalculation of a single digit could drag a bullet miles from its intended mark. She checked the optic, found the reticle's sweet spot, and tuned her breathing to the age-old cadence. Inhale, settle, exhale, squeeze. Hours of training condensed into one smooth arc of action. The tech set up a forward sensor net that fed live environmental data into her tablet. Wind gusts, mirage indices, barometric pressure. Small things that, over 2 kilometers, became decisive. They fed information, she adjusted, and the numbers meant the difference between a miracle and a tragedy. The medic kept his distance, but his eyes remained watchful. In this pocket before action, she felt the old hum of operational camaraderie wrap around her like a cloak. It was a dangerous comfort. Time stretched. The team did final checks. Assault elements readied explosives and breach tools. The AC-130 passed overhead like a sleeping beast, all sensors and capacity, ready to define a path home if things went sideways. Through a web of static and quiet code, the assault leader's voice came crisp. Overwatch, we're in position. You see your primary arms. She found the first guard position through the optics and froze only for a heartbeat. 10 degrees to the left of a scrubby acacia, a man paced the parapet with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He was wearing the same kit as his fellows, camouflage of local make, boots caked with dust, hunger like a second uniform. In the scope he was a dot that breathed. In real life he could be a father, a brother. In a raid he was a pivot. She adjusted for light refraction, for the gentle sway of the rifle under her shoulder. The first shot, she had learned, was always the one that tested everything. Her finger rested on the trigger, the natural readiness of a woman who had sent hundreds of rounds into small fields and seen them do the work of war. She waited for the order. She'd rehearsed that sequence 1,000 times in her head, the roll of targets, the timing cues, the cadence of fire. But rehearsals collapsed when time compressed and the air tasted like adrenaline. The overflight of the aircraft was solid. The assault team moved like ghosts across algebraic lines carved out of the earth. Her world narrowed to the size of the scope. 2 minutes before breach, she tightened the sling and checked the supplement kit, extra barrels, the small case of match rounds, a field kit for bore cleaning. The tech whispered, "Wind shift 8 degrees left. Compensation updated. Barometer consistent." She adjusted, a subtle twist of the turret, the micro-movement that most would never notice. "Overwatch confirmed sequence," came the crackle. Davidson's voice steady as a metronome when the metronome is counting hearts. "Alpha through Hotel, then India and Juliet. 2 shots per position, rapid transition. 60 seconds start to breach." Her throat tightened. 2 shots, rapid transitions, 60 seconds. Every movement planned down to millimeters. She took the first breath of her life that felt like the beginning of an admission. This was why she had ever trained, why she had put muscle and mind into geometry of distance. This was the reason she had let herself die once. "Copy," she replied, voice low and contained. "Sequence locked, waiting for your mark." The assault leader's voice cut. "Marking breach in 30. Ground operations synchronized with aerial assets." The world around her hummed at a frequency she'd lived on for years, a narrow band of attention and the clean mechanics of killing only what must die. She felt the space between her ribs contract until everything was a fine wire of focus. 5, 4, 3, 2, execute, Davidson counted. First round went heavier than the rest. The impact was tiny but absolute. A snap at Alpha's position and the guard collapsed with the slow surrender of a marionette whose strings had been cut. For half a heartbeat, she allowed herself the smallest assessment. The shot was true. Then she adjusted for Bravo, accounting for angle and rifling change and the minute bulge of heat in the air. The second shot followed, then the third, then the fourth. Muscle memory dictating transition, her motions precise, not showy. Shots stitched through the dark like careful stitches in a shroud. The suppressed system kept sound down but not hidden. Muzzle flash painted occasional strokes in the scope's edge. Her heart beat but did not race. She moved from target to target, calling out corrections, listening tight to the comms while her hands did the old work like a prayer. Time condensed. 8 shots, 9, then the final pair at Hotel. Every target answered with a thud that felt like a verdict. "Targets down," Davidson said into the mic. "Assault breach." The sound that followed was nothing like the controlled precision of her shooting. Breaching charges detonated with an ugly, beautiful clarity. Earth and stone and 1,000 small objects exploded outward when the doors gave. Flashbangs threw light like torches, and for a moment the world went white in her scope. The assault team moved through the opening like a tide, controlled and quick. She kept watching, ready to shoot any moving threat that could endanger the breach team. For 3 long minutes she scanned, ready to catch any roving fighters who might have stayed hidden. The assault team's reports trickled back. "Room clear, package secure." The words hit her like rain. A woman answered on the comm with a ragged voice, "Richardson." Alive, coherent, a presence in the static. "Prepare for exfil," Davidson said, voice tight but bright in a way that made the medic beside her crack a small, human smile. They did not cheer. There was little time for celebration. There was only the exhausting relief that comes after concentrated violence has done what it was designed to do. The medic checked her own line, a quick sweep, and the techs packed gear with professional haste. A chopper cut the night as they moved to extraction. The team exfiltrated, bodies moving like something that had dried and rehydrated into motion. In the helicopter, with Mogadishu receding beneath them like a bruise, she allowed herself a long exhale that shook her shoulders. Richardson sat strapped and tended, eyes large and bewildered. Davidson looked at Tessa across the small space, and for the first time since the tag had been noticed in an armory, he allowed himself to say something that wasn't strictly business. "Outstanding work," he said simply. She didn't look for praise. She looked at Richardson, the ghost of the woman they had saved, now flesh and bone and voice. The gratitude that came from that woman was quiet and immediate. It reached across distance and made something in Tessa's chest cleave and reknit. Later, when debriefing flared up with the sterile efficiency of after-action reports, she found herself filing particulars like a woman who has always been responsible: angles, rounds expended, residual fire, anything that might matter for replication of success or the post-mortem of mistakes. But beneath the numbers, a softer current ran, a sense that she had not only done the job, she had answered a summons. She had been needed and she had responded. Exfil warmed into transit. The aircraft hummed the same dry lullaby that had carried them in. She stared out a small window and watched the world unroll, their route back to a country that would never write her name into a public ledger. She had been anonymous when it mattered, and yet it felt impossible to return to the wash of normalcy now. The operation had reset something in her. The silence she had kept to survive 3 years had been broken by something essential and human, an act that had mattered. On the flight back, in the dim glow of instrument lights, Davidson leaned close. "You did exactly what needed to be done," he said. "Nobody in that compound will ever forget those shots." She nodded, not because she sought approval, but because the truth of it settled in her bones. There would be consequences, good and dangerous. Questions might ripple where she couldn't predict them. But for the first time in what felt like an era, there was a small bright thing in her. A thought that perhaps living and being useful were not opposites. Perhaps one could be both hidden and necessary. When they touched down at a staging airfield, the night's work concluded with the utilitarian finality of folding maps and snapping straps. The assault team moved into cold debrief. The medic bandaged the final minor scratches, and the techs counted equipment. Richardson's debrief would move into intelligence corridors that smelled of bureaucracy and consequence. She would be thanked in ways that should have been loud and public. Instead, this rescue folded into classified files and private commendations that would often be denied in public, but exist in the quiet ledger of those who knew. Tessa slid from the helicopter into the pale light of an airfield that smelled like jet fuel and possibility. She felt the weight of the rifle case at her side again, the same weight that had once been the axis of her life. Davidson gave her a brief nod that transformed into a quiet, private recognition, a promise, perhaps, that this was not the end of the story between them. She walked away from the aircraft alone for a while, letting the noise fall behind. In the low wash of cold air, she unclipped her dog tag from beneath her shirt where she had kept it tucked like a secret talisman. For 3 years it had been a relic. Tonight it felt like an oath. 2940. The number was still engraved in steel, still faint but indelible. She had made the impossible shot again, not in a mountain range this time, but in a small compound under the hot, indifferent sky of Somalia. A life had been saved because she had chosen to stand and pull the trigger. As she zipped her case closed and moved toward the waiting vehicles, she realized the day had changed her shape. She was still Tessa Ward when she needed to be, quiet, meticulous, invisible. But she was also Ghost 6 again, necessary, lethal, and painfully alive. And if her anonymity would now be a shield that had been pierced by purpose, she would learn to wear new armor, one made of measured choices and the knowledge that sometimes the only way to live with the past was to use it. The ground beneath her no longer felt like an accusation. It felt like the place she stood to do what had to be done. Why did silence feel heavier after the mission than before it? On the flight back, there had been the clean exhaustion of victory, the rare satisfaction of saving someone who otherwise would not have lived. In those hours, the weight had been bearable, necessary, almost good. But once she returned stateside, back to the gray corridors, the mundane armory racks, the endless routine, silence stopped being relief and turned into pressure. Every sound reminded her of what she had done. The click of a bolt sliding home echoed like a shot at 2,100 meters. The smell of solvent dragged her back to that ridge overlooking Mogadishu. The tag on her chest felt like it burned hotter now, the engraved number a truth that couldn't stay hidden forever. The world hadn't shifted visibly. Her supervisors at the base still thought she was just Tessa Ward, maintenance, reliable and quiet. The armory still needed dusting, weapons still needed cleaning. She performed her tasks with the same precision as always, but inside she was restless. Restless and afraid. Because once you step out of the grave, people notice. Yeah. Davidson didn't wait long. 2 weeks after Somalia, she saw him again. Not in the armory this time, but in a diner off a stretch of highway where no one looked twice at uniforms or crew cuts. He sat in a corner booth, steaming coffee untouched, a manila folder on the table between them. "You're restless," he said, not asking, just stating. Tessa stirred sugar into her cup, avoiding his eyes. "I'm surviving. That was the deal." He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. "Survival isn't enough. You know it, I know it. You think about it every night." She said nothing, but he wasn't wrong. The folder sat there, heavy with promise or threat. She didn't want to touch it, didn't want to see what lay inside, but she did. Her hand slid it toward her, fingers brushing the cardboard edge. She opened it halfway. Inside, satellite photos, names, a location she recognized from briefings years ago, Eastern Europe this time. A network of arms traffickers feeding weapons into conflicts the world pretended not to see. "They're fueling a war that's killing civilians," Davidson said. "We have an opportunity to cut them off, but it requires precision. It requires someone who can take the impossible shot." Her throat tightened, the old words again, impossible shot. She closed the folder. No, Somalia was an exception, not a return. His eyes softened, not manipulative, not coercive, but something more dangerous. Understanding. "You can tell yourself that, but you and I both know you're not meant for wiping dust off rifles. That's not living, that's hiding." Her chest ached because he was right. But being right didn't make him safe. She pushed the folder back across the table. "I gave you one mission, that's it." He nodded slowly as if conceding, but his eyes lingered on her and she knew it wasn't over. Not for him, not for her. Yeah. That night in her apartment, she found herself staring at the rifle case she hadn't returned yet. The case sat in the corner like a sealed secret, waiting. She could hand it back, could walk it into the facility tomorrow, log it out and close the chapter. But she didn't. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, and ran her hand across the case. Her fingers traced its ridges as if she were touching a scar. She thought of Somalia again, Richardson's face when they pulled her out, Davidson's voice steady in her ear, the clarity of the moment when every calculation aligned and the round found its target. That kind of clarity didn't exist in silence. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. Instead, she whispered to herself, "You're not supposed to be alive." Because in the official world she was. Ghost 6 had been declared dead, file closed, honors quietly archived. Tessa Ward existed, but she was nobody. If anyone saw too much, if anyone connected the dots, everything would collapse. Yeah. And someone did see too much. It started small. A man in the armory, one of the younger lieutenants, asked why she handled the weapons like she'd fired them in combat. She smiled it off, deflected, said her father had been a hunter. The lie was easy, but the seed was planted. Then another moment. During a base range qualification, she'd been asked to demonstrate cleaning procedures on a sidearm. Out of habit, she disassembled, cleared, and reassembled in half the time the manual allowed. A corporal had raised his eyebrows. "Ma'am, you've done that before." She laughed it away, but laughter didn't erase suspicion. Every slip, every instinct, every second of muscle memory betrayed her. Davidson had been right. You couldn't bury what you were. Not really. Yeah. The crack became a break one evening when she returned to her apartment and found her door slightly ajar. She froze in the hallway, the world sharpened. Adrenaline surged like it hadn't in years. She slid a hand inside her jacket where a small backup pistol waited. Slow, quiet. She pushed the door open, heart pounding. Inside, the apartment was dim. One figure sat in her chair, waiting. Not Davidson. A woman, civilian clothes. Early 40s, neat hair, eyes that carried authority. She didn't move when Tessa entered, just watched her with calm intensity. "You're a hard one to find," the woman said softly. "Ghost 6. The name hit like a blade. Tessa didn't lower her pistol. "You have the wrong person." The woman smiled faintly, not cruelly but knowingly. "No, I don't." The silence stretched, heavier than any rifle she'd carried. Whoever this woman was, she had broken the wall Tessa had built. She had spoken the name that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And Tessa knew in that moment that her return in Somalia hadn't just awakened the ghost. It had drawn attention, attention she might not survive. Why hadn't she pulled the trigger the moment the woman said her name? Her pistol remained steady, sights leveled on the stranger's chest, yet her finger refused the final motion. Because it wasn't just what the woman said, it was how she said it. Calm, certain, as though Ghost 6 wasn't a name that belonged to a ghost at all but to someone standing alive in this room. The woman leaned back slightly in the chair, unthreatened. "You can put that away, Sergeant Ward." Tessa's breath hitched. She hadn't heard that rank in years. Not since the file closed, not since the grave was dug. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice low but sharp. The woman's smile flickered. "You can call me Mason. I work higher up. Let's say above Davidson. He runs teams. I run what happens to teams. And sometimes what happens to the people who don't exist anymore." Tessa's grip tightened. "You broke into my home." Mason shrugged, calm as a stone. "Doors are just doors. I needed to be sure you'd listen." Silence thickened. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a wall clock. Tessa's heart was louder than both. "You've been busy," Mason continued. "Somalia was supposed to be quiet, but quiet doesn't mean invisible. I saw your signature the moment the reports hit my desk. 9 men. 60 seconds. A civilian pulled out alive. That's not Davidson's doing, that's you." The pistol wavered by a fraction. The truth cut too close. "You should have left me buried," Tessa said. Mason's eyes softened, though they didn't lose their sharpness. "Maybe. But tell me, when you pulled that trigger, when you saved that woman, did it feel like a mistake?" Tessa's stomach twisted. Images flooded back. The tight grouping of shots, the rush of adrenaline, Richardson's shaking hands clutching her rescuers. A life saved because she existed. She lowered the pistol, though she didn't holster it. "What do you want from me?" Mason's expression hardened. "The truth, we need you, more than Davidson will ever admit. He told you about Somalia, but he didn't tell you where those traffickers were getting their weapons, or what they're planning next." Tessa frowned. "Why don't you just use your own people? Why drag me back?" "Because," Mason said, leaning forward now, her voice low and deliberate, "this isn't about soldiers who can shoot straight. It's about one person who can make the shot no one else can. Davidson was right about that, but he's not telling you everything." Yeah. Mason unfolded a file from the bag at her side. She spread photos across the small coffee table, blurred surveillance stills, intercepted communications, coordinates etched in red. Tessa forced herself to look, though every instinct screamed to push them away. "These men are moving something worse than weapons," Mason said. "Radiological material, dirty bomb potential, destination, unknown. We know it will cross Eastern Europe within a week, and we know it will end up in the hands of people who will use it." Tessa's throat went dry. Radiological, not rifles, not hostages, not something that could be swept under the rug. "You're asking me to stop this?" she asked quietly. "I'm telling you," Mason corrected. "You're the only one who can. Davidson thinks you're a tactical asset. I see something else. You're the difference between this ending in silence or in smoke over a city." The room felt smaller. Her apartment, once a cage she thought she wanted, now pressed in on her. "And when it's done," she whispered, "what happens to me?" Mason held her gaze. "That depends on you. You can walk away again, or you can accept that Ghost 6 doesn't get to stay dead."
Yeah.
The conversation stretched into the small hours. They spoke of logistics, of insertion routes, of contingencies. But the real conversation was unspoken, humming beneath every word. Trust, or the lack of it. Tessa didn't trust Mason. She didn't trust Davidson either. But the mission, if it was real, if the intel wasn't dressed in lies, was too big to ignore. Civilians didn't get second chances when radiological material slipped through the cracks. After Mason left, Tessa sat alone, the apartment darker than ever. She held the dog tag in her hand, running her thumb over the number. 2940. She had once told herself it was the shot that ended her life. Now, it felt like the shot that defined whether her life meant anything at all.
Yeah.
The next morning, Davidson found her waiting in the same diner. He didn't act surprised. "You talked to Mason," he said simply. Tessa studied him across the table. "She says you're not telling me everything." He exhaled, a shadow of frustration passing his face. "Mason deals in half-truths, always has. You think I'd drag you into this if there was another way. You think I want you risking your life again." She leaned forward. "Then tell me the whole story, right now, or I walk." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Davidson's jaw worked, his hand curling into a fist against the tabletop. Finally, he nodded. "She's not lying about the material," he said. "Dirty bomb grade, but she didn't tell you who's moving it." His eyes locked on hers, cold and steady. "Rogue elements tied to our own, contractors who went black, men who used to work for us. That's why this is off the books. That's why it has to be you." The weight of it landed like a round to the gut. Not foreign enemies, not faceless insurgents, Americans. Her breath caught. "You're asking me to kill our own." "I'm asking you to stop men who have betrayed everything," Davidson said. "You pull that trigger, you're not killing brothers. You're saving cities." The room felt too small, the air too thin. She leaned back, her chest tight with something deeper than fear. Betrayal. The kind she'd known before. The kind that had buried her.
Yeah.
That night she stood on her balcony, the city lights stretching indifferent in the distance. She wanted to vanish into them, to dissolve back into anonymity, but she couldn't. Not anymore. She spoke the truth aloud, though no one was there to hear it. "I don't want to do this again." But the silence that followed was cruel, because silence wasn't enough to stop a radiological weapon. Silence wouldn't save a city. Finally she whispered, "One more mission on my terms."
Yeah.
Her terms were clear when she met Davidson and Mason again. "No exposure, no records. If I disappear, you let me disappear. And if I succeed, Ghost 6 stays in the shadows. Forever." Mason inclined her head, agreed. Davidson only nodded, though his eyes carried something heavier. Something that said he knew the price was going to be higher than either of them admitted.
Yeah.
3 days later, she was on a plane again. The rifle lay in its case by her side. She didn't touch it, didn't need to. She already knew it would feel the same as it always had. Cold, familiar, necessary. As the engines roared and the night fell away beneath them, Tessa closed her eyes. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about what you owed the world, even when the world had tried to erase you. Why did the silence before the shot feel heavier than any firefight she'd survived? The mountains of Eastern Europe stretched dark and jagged beneath the winter sky. Snow clung to the ridgelines, thin and brittle, the kind that didn't soften sound but amplified it. The cold cut through gloves and fabric, numbing her fingers, but her body knew the ritual well enough to ignore the sting. Rifle case open. Optics checked. Range chart committed. Through her scope, she saw the convoy winding its way down a dirt road cut into the slope. 3 trucks reinforced. Armed men in the back. Faces wrapped in scarves, rifles slung casual but ready. And 1 crate strapped under a tarp glowing faint in her thermal lens. Radiological material, enough to poison a city. She exhaled slow. Calculations filled her mind, wind speed, angle, bullet drop at 2 kilometers. She muttered them under her breath, the way some people prayed. Below, Davidson's team moved into position, silhouettes against the snow. Mason's voice crackled through comms, precise, clipped, every word measured. Confirm overwatch, targets aligned. Tessa's voice came low, overwatch ready. For a moment it was Somalia again. Different dirt, different sky, but the same fragile thread of seconds stretched tight between decision and disaster. She told herself this was one last mission, one act, and then she'd vanish for good. But part of her knew better. Ghosts don't vanish, they linger.
Yeah.
The convoy halted. Men climbed down, weapons scanning the tree line. One of them barked an order she couldn't hear. Another lifted a radio. Her scope found his chest. Easy shot. 1 pull and he'd never speak again. Do not fire until I give the mark, Davidson said, voice steady. She waited. The scope magnified every detail, the quiver of a hand, the condensation of breath, the snow dust curling off boots. She didn't blink. She couldn't. On my mark, Davidson began. The world exploded. Not the convoy, not the targets. Her comms. A second frequency burst in her ear, deafening. Mason's voice, sharp and cold. Ward, abort. This isn't what you think. The word hit harder than gunfire. Abort. What? She snapped, eyes never leaving the scope. Intel's changed, Mason said, fast, clipped. You fire, you trigger a chain we can't contain. That convoy's bait. Davidson didn't tell you. Her heart hammered. Through the lens, she saw Davidson's team shifting closer, weapons ready, no hesitation. Overwatch, take the shot, Davidson ordered. Mason's voice overrode him. Don't you see? He's using you. He needs a ghost to blame. You fire, you become the proof. The scope shook in her hands, not from cold, from the fracture of trust. Davidson again, harder now. Ghost 6, fire. Her finger hovered on the trigger, 2 voices in her ear, one promising order, one promising truth. She had seconds to decide.
Yeah.
Her breath stilled. Her mind split into 2 worlds, one where she obeyed Davidson, one where she believed Mason. Both ended with blood. Then instinct chose for her. She shifted her aim, not at the convoy, not at the guards, but at the tree line where movement flickered. Different uniforms, different rifles, shadows where none should be. She squeezed. The shot cracked through the mountains, echoing forever. One of the shadows fell, the kind that didn't belong to Davidson's op or the convoy. A third player, hidden, waiting. Contact, ambush, someone shouted over comms. The hillside erupted. Gunfire spat from the ridges. Davidson's men dove for cover, caught in crossfire from enemies neither side had mentioned. The convoy scattered, guards scrambling. Through her scope she saw it unfold. Davidson's team pinned, Mason's intel half-true, the convoy still alive. And her in the middle, the ghost who had no side.
Yes.
The next 30 seconds became muscle memory. She swung the rifle, shots cracking like thunder. A gunman in the rocks down. Another rising behind the convoy dropped. Every shot surgical, no waste, no hesitation. She called corrections under her breath, her voice flat, controlled, as though silence itself obeyed her. Davidson's voice fought through the chaos. Ghost 6, cover us. Mason's voice cut in, furious. Ward, disengage, get out now. Her teeth clenched. Both of you shut up, she hissed. Her world narrowed to the scope, to the targets, to the math of life and death. The rifle bucked, settled, fired again. 5 rounds, 10. Each one an anchor holding chaos from breaking fully. By the time the dust settled, the ambush had broken. Survivors fled into the tree line. The convoy was crippled, trucks shot through, men scattered. But Davidson's team was bloodied. 2 down, 1 unmoving. Her chest heaved. Smoke curled from her barrel. The cold had seeped into her bones, but the rifle was warm in her hands.
Yes.
Exfil now, Davidson ordered, voice ragged. We're compromised. Negative, Mason snapped. We secure the crate first. Tessa's scope found the tarp, still strapped to the lead truck, still glowing faint in thermal, a prize both sides wanted. And her finger tightened, because she knew if that crate reached hands on either side, the mission was failure. Cities would pay the price. She whispered to herself, one last shot. She adjusted elevation, windage, calculated the angle of the blast. The crate was armored but not invulnerable. One precise round placed dead center would rupture it, contain the material, render it useless. But it would also end everything. Davidson's mission, Mason's leverage, her own survival. Her breath stilled, she squeezed. The round cracked. Through her scope she watched the crate bloom, not in fire but in a puff of inert dust, radiation shield cracked, material scattered but contained. Dangerous still but no longer transportable. The convoy stopped, men shouted, Davidson cursed, Mason fell silent. And Tessa Ward, Ghost 6, closed her eyes.
Yes.
The exfil was chaos. Davidson's survivors dragged themselves out under cover of smoke. Mason's comms went dark, cut off or cut out. Tessa hiked out alone, rifle on her back, snow crunching beneath boots that carried her further from answers. No one came after her, not Davidson, not Mason, not the convoy. Because they all had what they needed, deniability. And she had what she needed, choice.
Yes.
Days later, in a nameless city, she sat on a bench at dawn. Her rifle was gone, dismantled, parts scattered across continents. Her tag hung heavy against her chest. She ran her thumb over the number one last time. 2,940. The distance that had defined her, the ghost that had haunted her, the number that reminded her that sometimes the line between life and death was less than a breath wide. She slipped the tag into her pocket. Ghost 6 was still alive, but only for her. She stood, shoulders straight, eyes steady. She would not wait for Mason or Davidson. She would not wait for the world to drag her back. For the first time in years, she felt free. Because she finally understood. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.